episode 27 of Light on Leeds podcast, I speak to historian John Boocock. John talks about the Leeds 1917 Convention, which was set up to support the First Russian Revolution. He tells me about Leeds' alternative publications, including Leeds Other Paper. Have a listen, do! So for this episode of Light on Leeds podcast, we have John Boocock. Thank you very much for coming along.
And thanks for inviting me.
No problem. So can you tell me a little bit about the 1917 Convention?
The Great Peace Convention of 1917, I'll tell you why I came across it. It was... somebody had been talking about it on Facebook, the ubiquitous Facebook, and what it was it was mentioned that it was coming up to the 100th anniversary. So it was 2017. It was in June, and it was a meeting that took place after the Russian Revolution, and the then pacifist left of both the Independent Labour Party and the British Socialist Party, some trade unionists, decided to get together and see whether or not they could put together Soviets in the UK, much to the dismay of the traditional Labour Party, fancy that, and the government. Anyway, they tried to set this meeting up in Leeds, and they were going to do it in what we now know as the Leeds Museum. In those days it was called the Albert Hall. It was before it was a civic theatre.
Oh, right.
And I was really interested, not anything at all to do with the politics, but because I'd had my lunch for 5 years in the canteen below the civic theatre, because I went to Leeds Central High School, and that's where we had our lunches, and I thought, I like that building. And in it there's there was a mural around this cellar room of Leeds Market, and I thought, I'm going to go and have a look. And I was in Leeds at the time. Anyway, it's not there anymore now. God knows where it is. And as a result of that, I thought, what else is there about this peace convention thing? And I happened to go to a day they did about it at the Swarthmore Centre, where that well-known anarchist, Michael Meadowcroft, ex-Liberal MP, gave a talk about it. And they had a load of other people talking about it. And I thought, this is interesting. I wonder if we could recreate it. A bit later after that, I was up in the Welsh Valleys with John Langford from the Mekons and his Welsh band, the Men of Gwent, because John and I are pals. And I was telling him about this story. I said, it'd be great, we could recreate this. And he said, why don't you do it for our festival, our 40th anniversary, Mekonville, in Suffolk? And he said, we will read it. So I rewrote it so we could read it. We did it. Kevin Lycett, who was also in the Mekons, wrote a couple of songs. People from Leeds bands who were at the festival from Esper Scout, Sarah and Rach, came and they did some of the music with him. And we thought, hey, this is quite good. And we roped in a couple of other people who were interested. Chris was in it, Chris Nixon.
Oh, yeah.
My wife, Julia, who is actually a proper actor. She trained at Bretton.
Oh, excellent.
So we had a group of us. Some of the Mekons were in it. Sally Timms, John Langford. They all, they did their bit. And it was Daisy Bellis. There were lots of people from Leeds involved. And it was really good that we did it at Mekonville. We were all there because we were related in some way to the Mekons. And then we decided that we wanted to do it again. So we did, and we did it at East Leeds FM up in Seacroft.
Oh, okay, yeah.
In that beautiful room.
Is that Chapel FM?
That's it, yeah.
Yeah.
And we did it, that's at Chapel FM, East Leeds. Well, it's East Leeds to me.
Yeah. Anywhere
the other side of Armley is. But the great thing about it was that by that time we'd solidified into a working group. And we were then invited to do a second piece for the celebration of the Chartist uprising in Newport, and we wrote a piece called The Spark Once Ignited, which was about the links between what happened in West Yorkshire at the same time and what happened in Newport, because the Chartism, the other great place for it really was West Yorkshire, and particularly Halifax.
Really?
Halifax had, it was revolutionary in the 1840s. There's a fantastic book called Halifax 1842, The Year of Revolution, by Catherine Howard, who older people remember as a folk singer from the 70s. But Catherine, she wrote a book about it, and it is the Bible for that period, and she is the expert. There's lots of other people who wrote stuff earlier, but I think with hindsight she was able to pull those bits together. So we used that as one of the sources, and a lot of other things, because as a historian, as I now am, I could use the Bodleian Library because I was a student at Oxford, and lots of other resources. The Local Studies Library in Leeds, which is probably the best one I've ever been in, and the staff there couldn't do more to help. So we produced this second piece, and we're now looking for a venue to do it again in Leeds with more. We'll rewrite it slightly to put more of a slant on the stuff that happened in West Yorkshire, because there's a lot of stuff we had to leave out. The one thing that was important about it was we discovered Patience Kershaw,
Right.
who was a kid who worked down the pit and eventually died in Stanley, what we call now a mental, what do they call it, not a mental home, they've got a different name, an asylum.
Yeah.
And she died in Stanley, age 40, with no family. And obviously suffering from, I think that it was probably syphilis. She was bent crooked from having worked in the pit. She had a strange body shape because of, as a child, pushing the coves, the pit trucks.
Gosh.
And we found out about Patience. So we included her in our piece because although the miners weren't directly involved in what happened with the Chartism, they were directly involved in all the revolutionary things that happened that time. And in fact, out of the meetings that took place in Halifax, we eventually saw the NUM, which for me was interesting because when I worked at Leeds Other Paper in the 80s, it was during the time of the Great Strike.
Yeah.
I started work there on the day that the strike was called.
Gosh.
And then we, all through 1984, we followed it to the point where the articles in Leeds Other Paper, at the top it says miners' strike week 26.
Yeah.
We had something else to write about other than damp in houses in Halton.
No, not for you.
Yeah. So I mean, there's an interesting sort of angle for me because lots of things I was treading on stuff, and walking over stuff and trying not to leave footprints because this was. My Yorkshire.
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, the peace conference is really interesting because you've got lots of people mentioned like Ramsay MacDonald and various other people. The people who weren't mentioned were interesting. I mean, Sylvia Pankhurst spoke.
Wow.
She gets 2 lines in the book.
Yeah.
But I mean, she spoke. I'd love to have heard what else she said. Mrs. Pete Curran. Now, Pete Curran was a Labour MP. But his wife was always known as Mrs. Pete Curran. Pete Curran eventually stopped being an MP because he liked the drink. But these are all, to me, people who are forgotten heroes.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think because of that, and because of working with people like Chris Nixon, because we've got very similar views on things, we like the 360-degree view of history.
Yeah, it's a great way to do it.
Well, I think it certainly is what I was taught. My tutors at Oxford, they banged it home every time. Do not be objective. Be objective. Do not be subjective. Whatever you might think, even if you're looking at something that you're really keen on.
Yeah.
So I can be rude about socialists as well as about capitalists. So that's been very interesting from my point of view because of working with Chris and other things, the Alf Kitson thing was really interesting. I didn't know anything about him, and then I suddenly realised he was a part of this other thing I've been looking at, the Brotherhood Church, the Beeston Brotherhood.
Oh, okay.
Who were based in a house at Marley Street, just down the way from here.
Yeah.
And they were Tolstoyans, sort of like not Christian socialists. There was a Christian element, but it was Tolstoyan Christianity.
Right.
They refused to do things. They wouldn't register their children for births.
Right.
They wouldn't send them to school.
Because they just wanted to be outside of the system.
No, it's because they didn't believe that government could tell them what to do.
Right.
Government can't tell anybody what to do was their line. There's some really good stories which you can find in all the old newspapers in Leeds, which, because you can now read those things online, they're much more accessible.
Yeah.
30 years ago you would have been going through the actual newspapers, whereas now you can get them all online.
Yeah.
Alf Kitson, he was a colossus in the sort of revolutionary movements in Leeds, things to do with unemployment, housing and things like that. And then suddenly, for some reason, after he was charged and found guilty in 1908 of causing a riot outside the Coliseum Theatre in Cookridge Street, he calms down. His family ran a cafe in Hunslet. and he lived just up the road at Cross Flats.
Oh, wow.
An interesting man, but completely. Chris and I have been doing work on it, and the local studies library are doing something about him very soon. And I think they're having an exhibition about him because I wrote some little bits for it.
Oh, nice.
And he will finally, get a bit more. If you look on the Secret Leeds website, which comes out of the local studies library, there is mention of him, but they're actually doing a proper piece about him.
Yeah.
I think he appears in some of Chris's books, because Chris turns facts into real fiction.
Yeah, he does.
And it works really well, and it introduces people into other stuff. So, there was... Those historical things are there, and it's been great for me because I now have, for want of a better word, the skills to be able to do it properly. I reference everything, which I'd never done before.
Yeah.
I look further afield for stuff, and I need to find more than one reference for stuff. So it means that when I do write something, I'm working on the basis that I'm pretty sure that it's right.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because sometimes when you do that, you then uncover things that people didn't know, but you can turn around and say it's correct, which is really exciting.
Yeah.
It means you've found something that nobody else did.
Yeah.
It's a bit like mining. It was certainly something which came up working at Leeds Other Paper, particularly on the news side, because we people who remember LOP will know that half the newspaper was news and half of it was a What's On guide.
Right.
And the news side was to be able to produce that week in, week out on a couple of part-time people was pretty amazing. There were lots of volunteers, and some of the stories that were covered there were not covered anywhere else. There was an internal paper written to tell you how to write for Leeds Other Paper.
Okay.
Patronising bit of writing. I loved it. Did write it, and it said, let's tell the stories that the mainstream media either will not or they will not inflate them to make them more. So there's a whole series of things about things that carried on over, long deportations. I can't remember the name of the woman from Chapeltown that was trying to be, for 5 years they were trying to deport her, and eventually she won. Right. And the only people who constantly kept on the case were Leeds Other Paper. I'm not sure that they had any effect on it, but they recorded it. Yeah. Newspapers are great because they have a date on them. Mm-hmm. And if something appears in a newspaper before a certain date, it had to have happened before a certain date. They're not Doctor Who. Whereas with, you get a bit of video and you think, well, how do I know when that was? Yeah. What day is it today?
The 14th of February.
Yeah. See, but so we can date stuff ourselves and say that. Who can prove that if this is listened to on the 15th of February? Yeah. And the other thing about LOP, which was my other great love, was the fact that they had a What's On guide. Right. And I was very involved in the music side of that and writing other reviews. But I like to think that from about mid-84 onwards, we turned it round. There were a number of people came in to write stuff who were incredibly good writers and knew the stuff. Howard Baker, who wrote the folk music thing, was a colossus. And you go and read his pieces, and they're really useful to be able to find out what was happening at that time and the slant you put on it. Mm-hmm. And you look at that next to the adverts that were in the newspaper, and it tells you what was happening and where, and you think, my, did they do that there? Did they really have something on every Sunday night at the Central Station, and was it only ever Snake Davis? Did Brendan Croker really play at the Astoria every night of the week for a whole year? It was that you can pick things like that. Yeah. And there were some people who wrote for LOP who went on to do much greater things, and some who had a bit of a more checkered sort of history, not in a bad way, but interesting, like James Brown. We knew him as Little Jimmy Bazag because he had his Attack on Bazag fanzine. And James, he went on to do, what was it, The Face and stuff like that.
Really?
That sort of thing. Yeah. He went and did that sort of thing. But he wrote for Sam's and for NME and places like that. And some of his stuff's really interesting. And it's of its time. Mm-hmm. Anne Scanlon, who I worked with there, she was deputy editor of Sound. She now works for, I think it's the Telegraph or the Times. Oh, wow. As a sub. She wrote the book about the Pogues, 10 years in an open neck shirt.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and it's, Anne was a student, she's from Brig. but from a very, very Irish family. Her dad, Miles, ran the best Irish pub in Brigg, the Nelthorpe Arms. But she was in Leeds. She was a student at the university, and then she came to work for LOP, and she used that as her lifting off point to go and get this job. But she wrote some great stuff. You can tell when people have written good stuff, because LOP always had people sending in letters saying, "You said this and I didn't like it." It was always the same people, and they all sent letters in which they're class, absolute class. They're either trying to tell you why something happened and it wasn't their fault, or they saying, "Why do you always bring us down?" That's usually the Labour Party. They didn't like it.
No.
Because if the SDP had no politics in it, the Labour Party at that time, it certainly didn't. And you can tell because the people who were key at that time either climbed the greasy pole or you don't hear from them. I'm trying to think. Yes, the leader of a council who became an MP, but there were at least two. I think the other thing was, apart from the political aspect of it, it meant you could do whatever you liked. If someone said, we came up with an idea and the rest of the corps said, "Oh yeah, let's do that." So we wrote 10 pub reviews.
Oh, excellent.
The Cardigan Arms was titled The Social Workers' Arms. And I think it had something in like, most of the people in there, when they get up in the morning, they don't think about what's going to happen for the rest of the day. They're more concerned about what colour boiler suit they're going to wear. And we got, every time we wrote about a pub, they played hell about it. There was always either somebody who used the pub regularly or the pub themselves, and they'd write long letters. And I used to hand in, because I wrote them, and I'd hand a thing in and say, "There'll be letters." And we liked letters because it meant people were reading the bloody thing.
Exactly.
And there'd be other things where we'd just be completely over the top about stuff on purpose to wind people up, and we'd put our own letters in.
Yeah.
But I don't know if people ever realised that the letters about hearing the first student in September, first cuckoo in spring, were written by people from LOP. And they were quite... I'm going to do a piece for the libraries in a couple of weeks' time, next week, about working at LOP and its link to the great Leeds radical publishing sort of history. And I went through all of 1984 and looking at the stories, and it was the letters that were just fabulous. We did a guide to all the venues in Leeds, and we made a mistake, and I hold my hand up any day of the week. The thing that we didn't do was we didn't put in about accessibility, and as a dead right on newspaper we should have done it.
Yeah.
But we were that excited about the fact that we'd even got as far as writing a list to all the guides, a guide to all the venues. We did it. Anyway, the next week there was a letter from somebody who should remain nameless, but is now a councillor in Leeds, and said, "This is awful, you've not put anything in about disabled people." And I thought, I know you, Al Garthwaite. and I'm really glad that she did it, because after that you can see where we mention accessibility.
Yeah.
But what was typical of what she did was that we were picked up on things not by the people who were affected by it, but by people who thought that we should do it because other people were affected by it. You know, like it's a bit like we get letters about racism from white people. Not often, but there was the best example was the Leeds Talking newspaper for the Blind Collective, who occupied our offices until we agreed that we would work with them to produce a spoken version of Leeds Other Paper.
Wow.
Which is fine, except that the only people who spoke were able-bodied and could see, and were really pushing us about it. When we said, "Look, it can be done, we'll give you the newspaper as it comes out," they wanted us to do it.
Right.
It was hard enough producing the newspaper when none of us had been paid for 4 weeks because we were short of money, and when we were living on a knife edge. And then they wanted to do this. It wasn't people coming and saying, "Hey, let's do this." It was people coming saying, "You should be doing this." Yeah. So there's a lot of that, but it was a lot of fun.
How long did that run for?
It ran from 1974 to 19. It was 17 years. No, more than that. It must have been 78. I think it finished in 94, and it was 17 years anyway. I should know the dates. I'll need to know them for next Tuesday. I'll have to write them down. I'm trying to think. Yeah, sure. It's 74 when it started because I'd left school by then, and actually, if there's anybody listening, I'm looking for something. Prior to Leeds Other Paper, there was another broadsheet in Leeds called the Bullsheet Bulletin.
Oh, okay.
2 sides of A4 printed on some kind of Gestetner, and with some little squiggly drawings on it. And it was, I think it was 4 columns of closely typed news. And it was the first time I'd ever seen anything that wasn't private eye, that, was, it was satirical, but it was actually talking about things like the then council, which had done something, and about trade unions and stuff. And it was a penny. And I know it existed because I was in the 6th form at Central at that time, and the guy who sold them used to throw stones at the common room window. We were on the 1st floor, and someone would go down and buy some. And I think there were 2 issues I saw. Bullsheet Bulletin. Be lovely to see if it's about somewhere.
Yeah, that'd be great, wouldn't it?
I've looked everywhere.
Yeah.
And I think that was the starter, because those people, they were clearly of an anarchist bent. Because the people who were founded Leeds Other Paper included key figures from the anarchist movement from Leeds. John Quayle, who wrote the book about anarchism, and who's currently president of the Marsden Jazz Festival.
Oh, wow.
Which is interesting, because if you look at early copies of Leeds Other Paper and you look at what music's covered, funnily enough, it's jazz and folk. There's no mention at all in the first period until it moves on, and then suddenly, I think because people from the university and the Polytechnic got involved and they had gigs. But I mean, the height was in the 80s, which was when there was lots of music in Leeds, and it was all covered. Lots of things were reviewed that just don't exist anymore now. A cassette tape by the Sinister Cleaners. Right. Len Liggins, who went to form the Ukrainians, and one of the guys who went into The Wedding Present. Andy Middleton, who was a photographer. Yeah. And there's a review of their cassette. It's not very complimentary. But then they went on to produce probably some of the best 7-inch single, 12-inch singles as well, which you can now get on a compilation CD, and it's proper. And it stands out against some of the stuff which doesn't last very long. So though things like that were reviewed, I don't know if they were reviewed anywhere else. They might have been reviewed in one of Richard Ruska's fanzines. Because the other thing that Leeds Other Paper did was it printed. And we printed for lots of people. Everything from the Nalgo branch at the council right through to the Labour Party's Leeds Weekly Citizen. Oh, really? On a Friday, which often contained stories which had appeared that day in Leeds Other Paper. Obviously, we were all thinking along the same lines. There's a whole group of people who couldn't have existed without the fact that they could come to us and get some print. Leeds Jazz printed all of their stuff. Leeds Jazz were one of our best clients, and we were very supportive of them, and they wrote some great stuff, and they put some of the best gigs on. I'm very privileged to have thought that when they were putting their gigs on at the Trades Club, Leeds was treated as some of the best jazz, which is because of that good thing, tolerance in Leeds. If there's one thing that I think is really good about a city, is that people mull about stuff, and there are people who are racist and sexist and all the other nasty things, but they're far outweighed by the others. Yeah, I think so. And it's not a new thing. No. Right back, as long as, I can remember, it's sort of like the 60s. My dad's mechanic was a Sikh. My school register, it did start off with Barker, Barron, Boocock, Booth. Then it got interesting, Chavaniek. And we had a Mishak, a Galacrodgian X, a Rabani, a Pandya, a Tayeb. And, in 1965, my class at school was multiracial, probably because Central pulled in kids from all over the city. Yeah. But, and from that point onwards, that was in my head. Yeah. And it's interesting, the people who were in my year all still have it in their head. Yeah. I'm in contact with a lot of them, and we all think the same way. Our education about things like that came from our community, not from someone telling us we should do something. And I think that's what happens in Leeds. Yeah. You eventually see it, and long may it continue. And that tolerance spreads in other ways as well. I mean, I love that day when the Pride March is on.
Oh yeah, it's fantastic, isn't it?
It's class, absolute class. It's mental. And I know people. I know lots of people in places like Wakefield who are part of the gay community there and the trans community. They're all over here for that.
Yeah.
And it is something that it matches our other great big event like that, the West Indian Carnival.
Oh, which I absolutely adore.
Yeah, the most colourful thing in the world, and it was the first.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Hill.
I mean, I was born in Reginald Terrace. So to me, that's, I've got that in my blood, and I'm a white kid with 2 white parents and 4 white grandparents, and then I don't know after that. I know that my dad's family were travellers. Yeah. But there's this great thing about that's Leeds.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah.
Did you tell me about that? You also helped. You were the first chair of the Leeds United Supporters Trust.
It was my fault.
It was your fault.
It was my fault. At the time, the supporters direct had received money from the government to set up supporters trusts, and because I knew lots of other football fans, because of a thing called the Internet Football Association, which for 10 years ran a tournament at Boddington Hall for fans of football teams who knew each other through their internet links. Right. The Leeds list, one of the oldest internet lists, still runs. And we had a football team, the Leeds Lards, so called after the Leeds Lard riot. Oh, okay. And there were lots of other teams. The Bradford team was the Internet Bantams. The Arsenal team was the Cybery Gooners. The Aberdeen team was Intermar Lamb. Don't ask. So these people came from abroad to play, from Italy, from France, from Switzerland, and also because you're on an internet group, you tend to be away from your city. At the time, I was living in Scotland, which is why I was in the group. Yeah. And our team was made up of people who came from all over the shop. Some lived in Leeds. So we knew all these people. I knew the people from Manchester United, Manchester City, neither of them could get an internet team together, so they used to put a dual team in called McVitie. Wow. Don't ask. So we knew them, and they were all looking at supporters trust, and we were all talking about it, because at the time Leeds was heading for its big crash. And a couple of us who had been involved in a liaison group with the club. Me, because I complained bitterly about racism, and other people who've been involved in other things. Simon Joes as well, who was also very keen on anti-racist stuff. So we all got involved in some way with the club, and then supporters direct said you should set up a trust, because at the time Leeds was a PLC, and it meant that then we could buy shares in it. Oh, excellent. And we did have 100 quid's worth of shares. Much, good it did us. But it meant that you were starting to find out a bit more. And the press loved us, absolutely loved us. I was given television training by Sky. Really? So that they could then interview me better. And I was interviewed a lot, and it pissed people off because, it's him again. And I suddenly realised that that's what happens. Ken Bates comes along, and I was interviewed by BBC Radio Leeds, and they said, what do you think about Ken Bates? And I said he should be at home taking his wife to bingo and doing his garden. It really pissed him off, and it really cheesed off old people in Leeds. Oh. And they complained about it. They said that I was ageist. They didn't see why I was saying, I was just angry. And Pete Lazenby, bless his cotton socks, wrote a piece about it in the Yorkshire Evening Post, and I was the subject of an editorial. Oh. Which this editorial said Ken Bates will do far more good for Leeds than he would. Oh. And I thought, right, I'll keep that one, because that'll come back to bite your backside. And it did, big style. And at first, all these different internet groups, Wacko for its sins and all the rest of them, they abused me badly. And the people from the trust didn't like it. Mike McGowan really wanted rid of me, because he'd seen my true colours. He was a radical and I'm not that. So I said, listen, I'm resigning. I don't want anything to do with it. Carry on. And they did carry on, and the trust has fortunately had some really good people. It does exist, and it's it's there.
Yeah, and can people sign up to join that then?
Anybody can, yeah. You just buy a share in it. It's like a Provident Society.
Oh, right.
Just look for Leeds United Supporters Trust on Google and it's there.
Excellent.
The Co-op helped a great deal with it, and a lot of other people. Some people who actually weren't even Leeds fans but wanted to help. Mm-hmm. And it's there. But it taught me a lesson, and that was if you put your head above a parapet, it doesn't half hurt when they throw stuff at you. But the Ken Bates thing was great. He banned me from the ground.
No way.
And I still don't know if I'm still banned. So I go, if I ever go to football, I go under my pseudonym.
Don't reveal it.
James Spinner. But the whole thing is... I mean, it's still, to me, football at that level is just bizarre. Mm-hmm. Because of being banned from Elland Road, it didn't bother me. Mm-hmm. In fact, it saved me a lot of money.
Yeah, I bet.
And the two good things were that I could then follow my other two great footballing loves, one of which is Ross County, which is the most northerly Scottish League club. It's just north of Inverness Cally. I can't tell you what we call them because it's a rude word.
Okay.
And I'd been involved in helping them get into the league as part of my job when I worked in economic development in Scotland. So I've always had a soft spot for them. And the other thing was going to watch non-league football. And at that time, the Leeds United women were still being supported by Leeds United. They still exist, but I went to see quite a lot of women's matches as well when they were playing at Garforth. And they played great football.
Yeah.
Women's football, I think, has still got a long way to go. It's so good.
I think so. I really enjoyed it last year, the World Cup.
Yeah. I think that did so much for the game, but I think the big problem is that where the money is at the moment. It's the same in all sports. Premier Rugby Union, they've taken all the money off the Championship, which will affect Leeds. Yeah. And I think the same thing happens in Rugby League. Cricket, I don't even think about it. It's very difficult, cricket, very difficult.
Yeah, I just released an episode today with Danica Prim. And she was talking about how difficult it is, and she has a job as a teacher, as her everyday job. But she was saying that, Leeds Rhinos really support them in that they get the same training facilities, and she feels like the women's football coming up in the way it is helping them as sort of a byproduct.
I think also because for all its faults, professional rugby still has its roots in it was that meeting in Huddersfield was to do with class. Yeah, it was to do with paying people for doing something rather than hoorahs being able to do it for no. Yeah. I think rugby union has changed, but not that much. But rugby league still has this. The guy who wrote the reports in Leeds Other Paper, Ludwig Kasatkin,
not a great name,
who lives in Wakefield, he's a poet. And you can tell because he wrote the rugby league reports. It's called The Man in the Stand, and his reports are absolute brilliance. He uses like classical references and stuff like that, and he's not afraid of having to go at people from high up. He was given a pass as a reporter to go to sit in the press box, and the rest of the press complained about him and he was banned.
Oh gosh.
Great man, very funny, he used to write long letters to Leeds Other Paper as well. Unintelligible, great letters. Unintelligible.
Well, I always ask my guests 3 questions. Yeah. I think you might have touched on the first one.
The tolerance.
Yeah. So what's so great about Leeds? And you said tolerance.
I think, as I said, it's the multiculturalism, the tolerance for new ideas. There's lots of things came out of Leeds. Portland cement is the one I always think of.
Oh, right, yeah.
Scientifically, and there's lots of good things being done which are tolerated, which we have to protect. Also the civic tolerance, our art gallery, the local studies library, libraries in general. I'm very, very sad every time I pass the Malmaison in Sovereign Street, and I like to think that Tommy Lloyd is still in there, the man who ran the buses for LCT, Leeds Corporation Transport. On the side of the buses, General Manager Thomas Lord, Sovereign Street.
And is that where it used to be?
Yeah. If you look up above the door, there's a big Leeds badge.
Yeah.
And that's why. That was where the buses came in and out of. Because that part of Leeds was, that was more... Leeds has moved away from there. It's less centred on that part. But Lower Briggate was Briggate. That, the market was the top end of town.
Oh, right.
Chris Dixon, he waxed lyrical about it.
Yeah.
That kind of tolerance, and that pride, because tolerance is also pride, which is, I think, is why it's gay pride, it's gay tolerance. I'm proud to be gay. I'm glad to be gay. Is the song. Yeah. People are proud to be gay, but we tolerate that pride.
Yeah.
And there is intolerance, but that's people.
Yeah, individuals.
But Leeds has got this tolerance.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's. I feel it every time I get off a bus or get out of the railway station. Yeah, and you can talk to people. I was talking to a woman who was cleaning today outside a shop, and she says, "I better get on. I've only got an hour." And we'd had 10 minutes. And I felt I'd stolen 10 minutes of her work.
Yeah.
Just crack.
Yeah, it's just nice to have a chat with somebody, isn't it? And what would you say is something that's not so great about Leeds?
It's not something that's not so great, it's something that's not done. It's forgotten heroes. And I don't mean somebody who got a VC for flying a plane in the Second World War, good as that might have been. And I'm not talking about the guy who went to our school and became Lord Mayor of Birmingham, and the school banged on about that. I'm talking about the forgotten heroes, and they tend to be very working class, funnily enough. One person I keep thinking about is Al Kitson, and especially because of being, in this part of Leeds, because this was his domain. He was an anarchist. He worked hard for the unemployed, and I think he died a man looking at his past. There's a great thing on Leodis. There's a picture of his house, at the back of his house, and someone talks about it. It's on Town Street. At Beeston, and this woman talks about old Mr. Kitson used to sit outside on his seat and watch the world go by, and the dates and times and the house and everything, I thought they must be, and I checked and it is unsung, but that's going to change. We're doing something about it. Being in Beeston, I think about the Beeston Brotherhood, who were a Tolstoyan anarchist group. They were involved in lots of things. They ran a workshop for people to get electrical repairs and bicycle repairs. Now, in the period before the war, the bicycle was king. Yeah. As in Africa, in Europe, the bicycle changed the world. Yeah. So they used to do bicycle repairs. The guy who helped set that up went on to become a leading figure in the Labour Party and left them behind. But they carried on, and they were involved in lots of other things. And they had some interesting people who were involved with them. The Scheu family, Scheu, which is German. Yeah. And during the war, they changed their name to Shaw, Shaw, obviously because of anti-German feeling. Yeah. They'd originally come from Germany in the late 19th century and ran pork butcher shops in Bradford. And then some of them became engineers and they lived in Beeston. One half of the family was quite not radical, right, and went on to make quite a bit of money running an engineering firm, but the other half of the family were very radical. And then no one's done anything about them, so this is my job. Yeah. Ernest Scheu is absolutely fantastic. He rode a motorbike up the town hall steps. He was put in a workhouse because he was under 21 in London because he fired a pop gun during a debate in the House of Commons and shouted votes for women.
Oh, that's brilliant.
He was the secretary of the British Socialist Party in West Leeds. And he died in Bramley, I think in the 70s, I can't remember, but his family is still about, and I mean to go and talk to his family because I don't want to write about him and not let them know. Yeah. And I've tracked some of them down, and I'm going to have to bite the bullet and go and knock on the door. Mm-hmm. His brother Frank was the shop steward at the Newley munitions factory and brought all the munitions workers to a stop over a strike at Newley. Got all the engineers out because the engineers union during the war were really strong and very radical, and they were a shop stewards based movement. Their bosses were in London collaborating with the war effort, and Frank Shue brought them all out. And then he got sacked as well. He ended up working in Birmingham as an engineer. But the Brotherhood Church, there's a lot more to do, and these are some of the people, the key people who are involved in it. Went to move in like a commune in Pontefract, and I've been to see them. I go to their strawberry tea every year because their grandchildren are running it still.
Oh, that's amazing.
And interestingly enough, their grandchildren, they're radical as well. They're interested in green and politics and things like that, and they were involved in another thing we covered at Menwith Hill, which was the peace camp at Menwith Hill.
Oh, right.
I mean, just recently, there's a woman being arrested for the 4th time at Menwith for being outside. Minister of Defence, police arrested her.
Oh, wow.
And she's 74.
74?
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
The only place that reported it was the Morning Star, funnily enough, and it was Pete Lazenby. He's always there. I think he's an old CP member myself. There were several of them worked for the Yorkshire Post. So yes, the forgotten heroes, they're there.
But you're doing something to put that right, which is great.
Oh, I'm going to try.
And what would you say if somebody was if they'd been a long-term resident of Leeds? Can you tell us about a hidden gem that they might not have heard about?
Yeah. If you go to the top of Armley, everybody talks about Charlie Cake Park, the triangle. Everybody knows Charlie Cake Park. The Meekons even wrote a song about it because John Langford was working up there at St Mary's Hospital on community programme, doing health leaflets. So yes, everybody knows about Charlie Cake Park, and I think it comes up in Chumbawamba mentioned it somewhere as well. And if you live in Armley, you know about it. Just down the road from there is a street called Tower Lane, and it runs, and at the end of it on the right hand side is Tower Works, which is a garage, and on the left hand side there's this massive big side of a wall of a house, and you think, I wonder what that is, and it's called the Towers. And it's not just one house, because if you go back out into the road that goes up onto Moor Top, there's a gate entrance that says the Towers, and you go in through there and you come up in front of a row of these big mid-Victorian houses with a tower on the top, and the tower is a bedroom. I know, because I used to sleep in one. Right. And I lived at the one that's the end nearest Tower Lane, and myself and my then girlfriend rented the top floor. Oh, okay. And it was the servants' quarters. And that house, I mean, they're beautiful. They're real Victorian gems. They're stone built, not brick built. They have these towers with ironwork, and the one that I lived in had been the home of the then governor of Army Jail. Oh. And the story goes, and this is something again that I've got on my list. I'll have to do them quick because I'm 67. That the houses were built for Army Jail. Now, I don't believe that for a minute, because they wouldn't have built that many. They didn't have that many governors. They had one. Yeah. But you can walk around the back side of it in Upper Tower Lane, which is at the back, which is part of the old Packhorse Trail that runs right down the back of Armley and comes out of Ridge Road. And if you continue the other way, goes across to Greenthorpe. There's a lane runs down, and you can see on older maps that this is important. The Packhorse, it's the Packhorse route because it's got all the signs. It's got cobbles, not flags, and it's walled, and it goes in the right way. I think it's a much older route than people think. I think Armley Town Street came much later. Right. But the towers, and it's where, I mean, you'd have to walk up into what in effect someone's garden, and on the one side you'll see these ruined tennis courts, and at the end you'll see a dilapidated garage. But as a building, you think, yeah, I can see the governor's Armley Jail being there, and not at the bottom of Town Street. And I can see him being there, and his horse and trap, or it might have been a coach, I don't know, whatever he had. I don't think he had an horse because there's no stables. But that's how he would have got down Town Street and then across to the jail. Wow. I'm going to find out who he was and who else lived there, because now we've got access to the census data. Yeah, of course. Easy. And I did try to do it last night in the hope that I could tell you the name, but you can't do it on a phone, it's too difficult. No, yeah. You have to go through the enumerators books and blah, 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 blah. But it's worth doing. So I will, that's... I think what I'm going to do is write about the person who lived there rather than the place. Yeah, that would be great. So yes, I would say to anybody, come have a skeg. Just go and have a look. Yeah. Yeah. Get the bus. Go everywhere by bus. Do not drive. Walk.
Well, thank you so much for coming along and telling us about all of the things that you're doing. I'll put links in the podcast to some of the things that you've mentioned so people can look at things themselves.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
What's happening in this great city? We'll tell you. But wait a minute.
John Boocock. What a fascinating man. I particularly enjoyed his tale of being banned from Elland Road by Ken Bates. Music this week is the beautiful track Latthay Di Chaddar by Kinaara and featuring Satnam Galsiam. It's a perler.
Latthay Di Chaddar utte saleti rang maya aavo samne paave de pakand maya Latthay Di Chaddar utte saleti rang maya aavo samne paave de pakand maya ਸਾਡੀ ਕੰਧਾਂ ਦਾ ਮੋਛਾ ਮੋਰਿਆ ਉਹ ਸਾਡੀ ਕੰਧਾਂ ਦਾ ਮੋਛਾ ਸਾਡੀ ਕੰਧਾਂ ਦਾ ਮੋਛਾ ਮੋਰਿਆ ਨਿੱਕੀ ਜਿਹੀ ਗੱਲ ਤੋਂ ਇੰਜ ਕਰ ਛੋਰਿਆ ਲੱਠੇ ਦੀ ਚਾਦਰ ਉੱਤੇ ਸਲੇਟੀ ਰੰਗ ਮਾਇਆ ਆਵੋ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਪਾਵੇ ਦੇ ਪਾਖੰਡ ਮਾਇਆ ਉਹ ਮੈਂਡੇ ਗਲੇ ਦੇ ਆਤਵੀਤਾ ਉਹ ਮੈਂਡੇ ਗਲੇ ਦੇ ਆਤਵੀਤਾ ਬੇਟੋਲਾ ਮੰਦਾ ਤਾਂ ਕੁਛ ਨਹੀਂ ਉਹ ਕੀਤਾ ਲੱਠੇ ਦੀ ਚਾਦਰ ਉੱਤੇ ਸਲੇਟੀ ਰੰਗ ਮਾਇਆ ਆਵੋ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਪਾਵੇ ਦੇ ਪਾਖੰਡ ਮਾਇਆ ਉਹ ਸਾਡੀ ਕੰਧਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਸੁੱਟੀਆਂ ਰੱਸੀਆਂ ਉਹ ਸਾਡੀ ਕੰਧਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਸੁੱਟੀਆਂ ਸਾਡੀ ਕੰਧਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਸੁੱਟੀਆਂ ਰੱਸੀਆਂ ਨਾ ਤੂੰ ਪੁੱਛੀਆਂ ਤੇ ਨਾ ਮੈਂ ਦੱਸੀਆਂ ਲੱਠੇ ਦੀ ਚਾਦਰ ਉੱਤੇ ਸਲੇਟੀ ਰੰਗ ਮਾਇਆ ਆਵੋ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਪਾਵੇ ਦੇ ਪਾਖੰਡ ਮਾਇਆ ਸਾਡੀ ਕੰਧਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਮਾਰੀ ਆਏ ਅੱਖ ਵੇ ਉਹ ਸਾਡੀ ਕੰਧਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਮਾਰੀ